Welcome to the RollingThru Podcast. I'm Ortiz, a trainer, jiu-jitsu athlete, and physical therapy student. This podcast is all about bridging the gap between training, recovery, and performance through a holistic approach to fitness and health. Whether you're a combat sports athlete or just looking to move, feel, and perform better, you'll get insights from top coaches, athletes, and experts on strength and conditioning, injury prevention, and mindset. If you want to train smarter, stay injury-free, and optimize your performance, you're in the right place. Let's get into it. Today I'm joined by one of the top strength and conditioning coaches in combat sports, Phil Daru. If you're into MMA or boxing, you've probably heard his name or the name of someone he's worked with. Phil has worked with some of the best fighters in the world, including UFC champions Dustin Poirier and Joanna Jędrzejczyk. But Phil's journey goes way beyond just coaching. In this episode, we dive into his upbringing, his own fighting career, and the lessons he's learned from training elite athletes. We break down the biggest factors when it comes to improving cardio, strength, and performance, as well as injury prevention. We also get into what it really means to be an elite person, not just in training, but in life. Phil shares his mindset on discipline, faith, and what it takes to push yourself to the next level. Whether you're a combat athlete, coach, or just someone looking to improve, this is an episode you don't want to miss out on. So please help me welcome my guest, Phil Daru. Phil Daru, welcome to the show.
Appreciate it, man. Thank you.
I'm really, you've done me a big favor by doing this, and I know, just want to thank you again.
Thank you for waiting for me.
Yeah. I'm just glad you're here.
Daddy duties actually happened, and I had to take my daughter to a soccer tournament this weekend, which worked out well. You know, you're from San Antonio, I'm in Austin, but I didn't know like all that went into it, right? So, by the way, the coldest I've ever been, ever. Yeah. And it's 28 degrees, and I didn't think this was going to happen in Texas like that. You know, maybe Michigan, something like that, but it's a little different. And I'm standing out there, and I'm like trying to run laps as my daughter's playing and watch the game at the same time because I'm trying to get warm. And it was amazing. But good thing we got it done. We won. So we're going to the Nationals, which is awesome. So shout out to my daughter. Yeah, her team. You know? But yeah, man, thank you. I appreciate it.
But real quick, I already kind of introduced you to the audience, but if you can do me a favor and talk about, Phil Daru before becoming, 5-time trainer of the year, right? Trainer of the year, not trainer of the year.
Yeah.
Before Daru Strong Performance, before American Top Team, before your pro fighting career, before Alabama State football, right? So Phil Daru, the youngin from Broward County, from, Deerfield High,
yeah,
right?
Rough around the edges.
Yeah, right. And
gold teeth and tattoos.
Yep.
Yeah.
So yeah, you can tell me a little bit about, Phil Daru,
Yeah, I grew up playing sports.
Yeah.
I grew up doing martial arts too as well. Kempo karate at 4 years old. And then by about 8 years old in Florida, and just like in Texas, it's, football is a way of life. It's like what we do. So I really got into that, and then that kind of allowed me to understand how to like train properly, or at least try to train properly. So I started lifting weights at like 12, 13 years old. My grandfather actually, at the age of 72, or really it was like 68, he had a heart attack. And so he really started to train hard after that. He's like, I got to get my life in order. I got my body back in order. So he started training, and he would sneak me into like Gold's Gym. And I was like 13 years old, I remember. And he was benching at 72 years old. I remember he was benching 275 for reps. And I was like, damn, okay, I got some genetics too as well. So, I just started really fine-tuning the details on programming and getting better and really trying to get as strong and as powerful as possible. I'm 5'8", so I'm not going to grow tall. I might as well get wider, and be as strong and as powerful as possible. So I started learning how to do that, reading all of Louis Simmons and even like back when Joe DeFranco was doing his thing. I don't know if you know who that is, but he's like the godfather for me for strength training. And so I started reading a lot of his articles, ended up calling Louis at Westside, and he answered the phone. He's like, yeah, Westside? And I was like, this is Louis Simmons? And he's like, yeah. So we started to have lines of communication open with that, which was great. Was one of my mentors. Again, Joe DeFranco, same thing. But just learning the process, trying to figure out ways to get stronger and help my teammates too as well. So at probably around, I would say my sophomore year is really when I started to run the programming for my high school football team and try to find ways for us to just be bigger, stronger, faster. With that same time, like I'm living in a poverty-stricken environment, and my parents didn't have money. So you get into some trouble and you start doing things that you shouldn't be doing. So I was living two different lives, like selling drugs and playing football and being highly recruited as a football player, but also doing the wrong things at the same time. And so it got me into some trouble, ended up facing a lot of time at 16 years old. By the grace of God, I got out and was able to just do probation, did everything by the book, was able to get out in 2 years and transition into just making sure that I did the right thing all the time. That's when I found God and I started to transition my life in the right way. And by that time, I was in college, and my parents, my mother developed lupus, which we didn't know at the time. We thought it was myofascial pain syndrome and a couple other things, but she ended up having lupus. And then my dad got in a bad car accident. He was wheelchair bound for a little bit, who was a veteran too, so that helped with the VA benefits. But then I had a choice, because at that time there was no NIL deals, right?
Yeah.
Back in 2008, right? NCAA would not even allow us to have jobs. But I was doing some boxing on the off season too as well, with an alias name, just because I still wanted to fight. And I had to make a decision. So I ended up actually leaving Alabama State and going back to a small town where they moved from Broward County to Port St. Lucie. And at that time, I wanted to still box. So I was trying to go to any boxing gym around, but there was really not a real boxing gym in that area. And I didn't have a car, I didn't have no money. So the goal was, all right, I need to find a gym. So I found an ATT affiliate school owned by Dean Thomas. And Dean Thomas, for those of you who don't know, he's actually on ESPN now doing analyst jobs. But Dean was one of the first UFC fighters coming out of American Top Team. And he was big in that small town that I was in. So I remember he was opening up the gym door, and I ran up behind him, and I'm like, I startled him a little bit, and he looked behind me, like corner of his eye, and he was like, man, what's this kid doing? And I'm like, it's all good, man. I just want to learn how to fight. I want to train. And he's like, he looked me up and down, and he was like, not another hoodlum kid coming in here trying to fight, right? And he's like, all right, man, just come to the gym later on, and we'll sign you up. And I didn't know this, but he did tell the gym manager at the time, who was a friend of mine. He said, whatever you do, get that kid out of here. And the manager, Dan Donaldson, actually, he's a big time promoter now over there in that area. And he's like, I like this kid. We're going to keep him around. And I remember I just wanted to strike. I just wanted to do striking sports. Didn't want to grapple. I had no aspirations to get on the ground. But Dean kind of talked me into it. And he said, I was right around maybe 198, 205, so 205 pounds. He's like, you got to get down to 155. I'm like, I looked at him and I said, I haven't been 155 pounds since middle school, man. There's no way I'm doing that, right? But I did. I ended up, fighting at 155. And every day from then on, I went 2-3 days nonstop. I was addicted to getting better and trying to perfect my craft. And had a really good amateur career, because that's all I was doing. That's everything, along with, training guys here and there, sneaking them in the Gold's Gym, just like my grandfather did, and then I found a strength gym, which really changed the way I trained myself for fighting. Now, I took all that stuff that I learned when I was getting ready for football, and I kind of transferred that over into a mixed energy system sport like mixed martial arts. And Tony Montgomery was another key aspect or key contributor to my coaching elevation, per se, right? My learning process. And he had a powerlifting gym / strongman gym, kind of reminded me of Westside. So I trained there, and I was also training some of the athletes there. So I was able to really fine tune the way I coached all these different athletes, from high school football, collegiate sports, to my teammates and myself. And that allowed me to really understand how to train appropriately, fatigue management, and all these other aspects of physical preparation that you don't really get if you don't see a large amount of people on a daily basis. So that experience allowed me to elevate my coaching, my coaching game. And so fast forward a little bit, and I was like, what, at this point, I was training a lot of clients. I was also training for fights. And at that point, I was like, what, I'm paying all this rent as an independent contractor. I might as well just open up my own spot. Because my personality and my drive, especially, I think my mother instilled this in me too as well, was that I could do anything that I possibly think that I could do. And I'm going to keep trying to get after it as long as it's in the right position, right? So I ended up opening up a gym. It was like a small 800 square foot facility. And it's where I met my wife. She came to the gym, and she was she's 8 years older than me. So I asked her, how old are you? You know, just a standard, you know. She
For
thought
science purposes.
Science purposes. And, you know, she told me, and I said, okay, well, you don't look that old. That's great. No, she's beautiful. She looks younger than me still. She, I actually thought about it. I didn't say it out loud. Thank God I didn't do that. But she was taken back by my ability to articulate my words appropriately based on how I looked.
Yeah.
Right. So, you know, I ended up growing that gym from that 800 square feet to the same gym that American Top Team affiliate gym was at. I took that over, started doing strength and conditioning, running boot camps and working with my athletes and so on and so forth. Then at that point, about 6 months later, I outgrew that spot. And so we went to the next spot, which was 11,000 square feet. So within the span of 2 years, my life has changed drastically. At the same time, I'm trying to be a professional fighter, which is, those of you that know about fighting, it takes a lot of energy and focus. And if your focus is shifted in so many different directions, you're not going to be as successful as you can be. So, you know, as time went on, I lost fights that I shouldn't have lost, right? Getting caught in, you know, certain submissions and things like that because I wasn't training as much. And I had a decision to make. And I remember training my first professional boxers, Antoine Smith. I'll never forget this. And I was in fight camp and he was in fight camp. And I was training at Dean Thomas's school, which was about roughly 15, 20 minutes away from my gym. And I came late to train him. Now, he's a pro fighter. He was a former world champion. And he was pissed that I came late to train him. And I was like, well, I was training. He was like, man, listen, do you want to be a coach or do you want to be a fighter? Because you can't do both. And at that time, I was like, get out of here, man. Like, I was pissed that he actually said that. But then afterwards, I started thinking about it. I'm like, damn, he's right. And so from then on, I ended up winning my last fight, which was great. But I was due to fight again, and I was 2 weeks out, and ended up getting kicked in the back of the head, on accident, mind you. It was technical sparring, so it wasn't even hard. But it just came down right in the right spot, hit me in the back of the head, and I was concussed. And, you know, I've had concussions. I've had over 9, 10 concussions, especially playing football. You have that every day. Like, every practice, I got something. But this one was a little different. It was lingering on, you know, it was definitely all the signs, right? Nausea, headaches, the whole 9. And it took me about 3 or 4 days, and I was talking with Dean, I was talking with Dan, and I said, you know, what do you think? And they're like, listen, go get checked out and see what they say. So I went to the neurologist, and they were like, listen, if you don't stop, you're gonna have Alzheimer's by the time you're 50. And I go, damn. And I don't know if they were over exaggerating, but at the same time, I did see that lingering effect. So I had a big decision to make. And at that time, I was trying to go back to get my PhD. I have a tendency to like layer things on, by the way, if you didn't notice. And this is why I wanted to talk to you about this. This is perfect timing, right?
Yeah.
And so I was in class, and I remember I'm just not grasping like lectures and what they're saying. And I'm not memorizing things that I used to be able to memorize very easily. And I go, damn, this is crazy. So I made a decision ultimately to stop competing and fighting, right? Ultimately, you know, whatever you want to call it, retire, right? And at that point, I was like, okay, I'm all in. Let's coach. You know, let's just put all of my efforts, all of my energy into being the best coach that I can be. This is right around 2014. And in 2015, I asked Dean, because he ended up becoming a coach more full-time at the main gym, at the headquarters down in Coconut Creek. I said, if you have any fighters that you wanted me to work with, I have time on my hands. I'm down to come down there. He's like, get your resume together and bring it down. We'll see what we can do, because you're actually in luck. The strength and conditioning coach is leaving. We need to fill a spot. So I went down there first day. I drove down there immediately. And it's about an hour and a half away from where I live. And when I got there, they're like, all right, here, you're going to go ahead and shadow. You got to train Dustin Poirier, Tisha Torres, King Moldawal, and Hector Lombard. A very diverse group, by the way. Right? Very diverse group. But that's how it is, right? And they knew me because I used to come down there and train and cross-train and stuff, do some sparring. So me and Hector have known each other for a long time, since I was probably 20, 21 years old. I still work with Hector to this day. He's actually fighting for the GFL in April. And I got really close with Dustin. I got really close with Tisha and King Mo. And So they actually pushed for me to get the full-time spot. Long story short, I ended up being a full-time coach there. Working with them was a tremendous honor, was a blessing, and was able to work with well over, 60 to 80 pro fighters on a weekly basis, all from different backgrounds, different levels, world champions, and it allowed me to fine-tune my coaching. And I say this with my other coaches now, because now I have a mentorship group where I have over 5,000 coaches in the mentorship. And they all want to achieve great things in the sport, especially from a coaching perspective, obviously. But the one thing that I will say is that the goal is to make sure that you're fine-tuning the details. Because when I was owning a business and trying to run a business, I wasn't allowing myself to really be a great coach. I was doing so many different things at that particular time. Now, if you want to be a business owner and you want to train on the side, that's fine. I understand that. Then hone in on your skills of being a business owner, right? Marketing, sales, branding, right? Understanding financials. It's important. I think the biggest blessing that I had was I was able to step back from being an entrepreneur and become a full-time coach without having to worry about getting members into the gym. And it, again, allowed my coaching ability to elevate. And within that time frame, I was able to, okay, now I have a good grasp on this thing, on how to actually get somebody performing at the highest level. And now I'm at the point where I'm running more of the business side and I'm more coaching the coaches. So I'm 36 now, right? So I've been doing this for 16 years, right? And the biggest aspect of the training and the coaching that I've been able to understand is that you have to be there for that individual 100% of the time. And that's why I spent 10 weeks in Vegas away from my family with one of my fighters, because if you're not all in, just like in anything you're trying to do, you're not gonna hit the mark, right? You're not gonna be the best that you can be. Now, I've said this before, you can be competent in all these other aspects of life. You need to be, right? You can't just be an asshole or a dumbass, really, at that. I don't mean curse.
You can
I can go in. Okay.
Yeah,
all right, good. I am a strength coach, by the way. So, cursing will come out.
a little bit.
But what I will say is that once you've developed a mastery in a certain subject, start to get a little bit more, what's the word? I would say just try to be as curious as possible in things that you think will help elevate your game, not only as a coach, but as a person, as an individual, right? And so now I'm in that position where I'm bringing on other individuals from different walks of life because I am curious. And if you're curious and you know how to learn and you know how to execute what you've learned, you're going to be a more equipped human being, which allows you to do many things and allows you to be successful in anything that you want to do. So that's my spiel.
Yeah. And that's a lot there. And I want to dive into a couple of different things you said, starting with a little Easter egg. I know your first pro fight against Kurt Hallba.
Yeah.
Hallba.
Yeah.
Who may not be the biggest name, but that's still fought probably, I think 4 months ago, maybe 6 months ago. Won the Ultimate Fighter recently.
Yeah. Matter of fact, I was with Michael Chandler just recently, and I was saying that I fought Kurt. He's like, "Man, you fought Kurt?" And I go, "Yeah, my first pro fight."
Yeah.
And Kurt was 12-0 as an amateur
Yeah.
before I fought him, and he was also 2-0 as a pro at that time. It was a good fight. Like, for me,
New Orleans guy, right? Not New Orleans,
Louisiana.
Yeah.
I fought like 4 or 5 times in Louisiana, man.
Yeah.
But those guys are tough. It's good to see him, achieve what he's achieved and still going, because he's bounced back and forth. It's like, I know he went to the UFC, was out of the UFC, came back, won the Ultimate Fighter, and now he's doing great things. So hats off to him, man.
Yeah, I think he's 36 now.
So
he's been at it for, I think 2010, maybe before then.
Probably before that.
Yeah. And so it's always beautiful to see someone get rewarded for that level of commitment, dedicated his life to it, essentially. Right?
Exactly. And you can see listen, at the end of the day, you got to be able to lay down, put your head on the pillow and go, all right, I did everything I possibly could do that day to be able to rest, and then try it again and do it again the next day, and those compound over time.
Yeah.
Right? Those efforts every day. every night I jot down, I got a notebook and I jot down exactly what I want to achieve the next morning. And it's always going to be the most arduous task that I get done first, because it sets myself up for the day ahead. And so my biggest contribution to my athletes is giving them more of a strategic approach to just everyday living. It doesn't have to be just training, right? It could be just, whether it be, all right, spending time with the kids, spending time with the wife or the husband, and just trying to elevate yourself as an individual, because that will translate over into your fight and into any other sport that you're doing.
Yeah. And before we started here, we were talking a little bit about, like right now I'm about to start school, transitioning from this period of kind of being a trainer, being a coach, training myself, competing myself, and the debate of how deep into competing do I want to go and what sports I want to compete in.
Yep.
And one of the things you talked about was, if you're not all in, don't do it, right? Especially in the sport of any combat sport, really.
Yeah.
And not to belittle anything or look down on anything, but I think whenever, and I think you would agree with me, but whenever you fought Kurt Holloway and you were coaching, you had that interaction with one of your teammates and one of your training partners that, you want to be a coach or a fighter. And you were kind of dividing your energy, dividing your time between coaching, fighting, and life. And Kurt Holloway was kind of like, this is my life. And to his extent, it's worked out for him in the long run. And that's maybe a great example of commit yourself to a craft and, let it engulf your life. And that's kind of what he is, right? But yeah, that's real world example, right? What we were talking about before we started here. And yeah. And one thing I've heard you talk about in the past that you were kind of touching on just now was, you competed at, collegiate football player at Alabama State, right? Amateur fighter, pro fighting career, fought, future UFC fighter in Kurt Holloway. Being an elite coach, elite trainer. And I'm using this word elite a lot. And I think, I know how you view yourself in pushing yourself to the limit, physically being the best version of yourself, all that. I've heard you say that you don't need to be an elite athlete in anything, as long as you are an elite person in whatever you do, right? And so I've heard you talk about, and even before we started here, we were talking about, your kids, right? You've talked about being an elite coach and how if you don't want to dedicate if you aren't capable of dedicating your entire self to that craft, it's not really worth your time at this moment and where you're at in your life, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And I don't know if you have anything else to add to that, to being an elite person, because I think that's something great to keep in your mind, right? And as you go about doing everything, right, and doing everything to an elite level, and we all kind of get obsessed with, and I know I do, and I see it I train at 10th Planet in San Antonio, and I see a lot of guys there that want to be elite grapplers, and they think their value is in grappling, and they are much better at jiu-jitsu than I am, and they're much better than a lot of people there. But then, you go home and maybe life isn't what you want it to be, right? And so then, are you truly an elite person if you aren't taking care of your other things, right?
There's sacrifices that need to be made. I'll say that. I think Habib says it best. He had a guy that they brought into a camp. I remember seeing this. I think it was a tweet or something that they put out, but they brought him into the camp. And I don't know if you know, I've trained some of those guys in Dagestan. I've actually been to Chechnya and did a 10-day consultation with those guys. When we're talking about all in and sacrifices, they are away from their family. They're away from any friends. The only friends they have are the teammates that they have they're beating each other up on a daily basis. Because they've already made it a commitment, right? And they contracted themselves to being the best that they can be, and they don't negotiate anything other than, I'm going to pray and I'm going to train and I'm going to do everything that involves that. With that being said, if the goal, let's say for instance, when you become a world champion, in the beginning, the goal is to be a world champion. The goal is to be the best fighter you can be. Those motivations are deep, right? That's why when I coach, I peel back the layers on actually finding out what's their true why. And when you become a champion, you have to define your new why. Maybe it's retaining the belt, whatever have you, but it's not just that. Maybe they do have a family now, and now they're fighting for a deeper cause. And it's not just them, right? It's not a solo act, all right? I'm fighting to help my family. I'm fighting for my family so that I can put food on the table and give them the life that I never had growing up. And that's when you have these veteran athletes and fighters that allow themselves to make it to that next level of the evolution of where they're at in their career. So there is times that you're going to have to, again, still sacrifice. Dustin Poirier sacrifices every camp. That's why, he's at the moment right now, he knows that this is going to be the end of his career, because the most important thing for him isn't becoming a world champion. It's being there for his family. And when that moment hits, you have to make the decision. Now, I'm not saying that you can't obviously achieve greatness by still being there for your family and still doing, what you need to do on inside the cage or in the ring or whatever it is. But it's not going to be as easy. Let's say, I won't say easy. It's not going to be as simple as when you were a young kid and you had nobody else to worry about. So you have to take that into effect. And those are those veteran athletes, and for the most part, they've been in the league or been in the sport or been fighting for a long time, so they understand how to balance it. But they'll never be that all in as they were when they didn't have anything else to worry about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You mentioned Dustin Poirier, and that's, we're calling back on your time at American Top Team. And I've been it's been eating at me, and I would hate myself if I didn't ask you about some of your fighters whenever you're at American Top Team. I've heard you on podcasts talk about Edson Barboza, right? And how Edson Barboza, whenever he was at American Top Team, was either had the highest or top 3 in terms of the vertical jump, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if for anyone that's ever watched an Edson Barboza fight knows that is the most explosive, dynamic individual in the UFC, probably.
And always in shape.
Always in shape. Cut. What is he, like 37 now?
Yeah, he's probably 38.
38, yeah. He's been fighting since he was a teenager.
Oh, yeah. Well, younger than that. The baby.
Yeah.
Yeah. In Brazil.
They just produce those in Brazil constantly.
Uh-huh.
But, obviously physical freak, right?
Yep.
But something that right now I'm training a guy who is, training in MMA, debating on how deep he wants to take it, right? And so I've definitely been using you for a reference for a lot of that, right? And one, thank you for a lot of the free stuff you put on YouTube, and then that, for one, put me into it. And I was like, let me look into some of his other programs he's got, right? And go to the website. But with Edson Barboza, having the highest vertical, produces force on a crazy level, able to do all the dynamic moves, dynamic kicks he can in the cage.
Mm-hmm.
And he's an example of that testing on the vertical jump, right? And the vertical jump's probably, top 2, if not 1, in terms of measuring explosive power in the lower body.
Mm-hmm.
And that obviously translates, right?
Yeah.
Colby Covington at Top Team in the cage is known for a crazy pace, crazy cardio. Does whenever you were there, I don't know to what extent you worked with Colby, but was his testing as impressive as his performance in the cage in terms of his endurance?
High VO2 max.
Mm-hmm.
So from an energy system standpoint, you could see it in the cage, right? And so did Dustin, and so did Joanna. Like, these are some of the prime standouts that I would say from a conditioning aspect. They just keep going. Like, you really can't get them tired. There's some things that you can throw at them because it's just new, right? Like, everybody hates the prowler. Everybody hates the sled push, right? Because it's new to them. But you get them in the ring, or you get them in the cage, or you get them on the mats, and they're very, very efficient in their energy output. So I always said this, like, Dustin or whoever, anybody at that level, you can pretty much I'm not going to say do nothing, but be very less ball you miss. Let's put it like that, right? And I don't want to say come off the couch, but not be all in and say not be in camp, and go help your teammate. Let's say he works with a lot of his teammates. He comes and helps with their camps, but he can spar, 6, 8, 12 rounds and not be tired because he knows how to pace himself. And he's very efficient with his energy output. Same thing with Colby and same thing with all the others. So from that perspective, I would say it's very, I wouldn't say eye-opening, but it definitely is something that catches your eye for sure when it comes down to the numbers that he puts out and then the efficiency inside the skills training, which allows them to be there ready to go at any moment in a time when they need to be. So power can be lost faster. Strength can be lost faster than conditioning, right? When I'm talking about conditioning, I'm really talking about aerobic capacity. If they stayed sedentary and didn't do anything, right, they're going to lose strength. They're going to lose power fastest, right? So, and speed too as well. That goes fast. Aerobic work, aerobic conditioning, or anything of that nature that requires a gas tank, it will take you can detrain it, but it takes way longer. And so for them, as long as they do some type of training, let's just say general physical preparedness, right, for all intents and purposes, they just play a pickup game of basketball, right? Talk about basketball because you're a basketball player. Or anything that just is physical activity that doesn't really necessarily make them have to go into the gym and beat their body up. They can maintain that aerobic capacity and then go in to a training realm and be as efficient as they possibly can be because they're so equipped to doing the skills that they need to or performing the technical tasks that they need to help an individual. Not to get them ready for a fight. Obviously, you need to be all in and, peak and everything else. But just for maintenance, it's very, very attainable for those individuals.
Yeah.
When I start with an athlete, like let's say, for instance, amateur athletes, in the beginning, they have to be very technical, right? So we have to improve their skill acquisition. So a lot of the times, the training that we do is very general in nature, just to allow them to maintain their level of volume week by week on the mats, in the cage, and doing their drills and things of that nature so that they can be efficient once the time comes. Now, when you have an athlete that has made it to the next level, and maybe let's say in the UFC, it kind of switches where now we know that they're very technically efficient. We know that they have the skill set, the natural talent. We need to give them the X factor, and that's going to be getting them bigger, stronger, faster, more powerful, and being able to produce that power at a longer duration of time, right? And replenish that ATP, or replenish energy output so that they can be as explosive from the first round to the fifth round. So with Edson, he's so explosive, right? And he is efficient. It's just getting him to be that efficient and that powerful for 5 rounds or 3 rounds or whatever it is, and just not let up and be able to knock you out in the first round or the last round. And so that's where my focus becomes more of that's where my focus is when we're in camp. Outside of camp, we're looking at limiters. We're looking at the rate limiting factor of them getting better. So filling the gaps is the biggest thing, and creating a chain that is strong enough and no weak links. When we get into the fight camp, however, now we need to work on their compensators, the things that make them great. For Edson, it's obviously striking, right? So even from a technical aspect, let's say he's fighting a grappler. Well, the strategy is going to be obviously stop the takedown, evade shots, keep your distance, and knock his lights out. But before that starts, he needs to hone in on his grappling skills because he needs to close the gap on his limiters. So I think that's why GSP was so great, because there really wasn't any weak links. Now, he was great at one thing over the other, but overall, he was even on every aspect of the game. And so for me, and I also put Demetrius Johnson in this category because I don't see any weak links from an MMA standpoint. Now, you could say even now he's killing it in jiu-jitsu, by the way. You see him? He's a monster.
Yeah.
And he's super athletic, powerful, great conditioning. You don't see any weaknesses. The only time that you're gonna see him lose is if he gets caught. And it's by decision or a tactical flaw. It has nothing to do with his capabilities.
Yeah. So one of the things we were talking about is we were talking about Edson and Colby, and those are extreme ends of the spectrum in terms of elite athlete. Mm-hmm. And I'm just trying to translate this into a way that's a little bit more digestible for some people who don't have an exercise science background. Because, exercise science degree from, did you end up finishing a degree at Alabama State?
No, I actually finished at Indian River State College. Yeah.
College, okay. I also have an exercise science degree. So
there you go.
And for someone that doesn't have an exercise science degree, being able to, kind of communicate that. But Edson and Colby, you're talking about being so elite on the elite end of the spectrum that their efficiency with their skill and their efficiency with their movement was a major contributor to, in Colby's case, his cardio output, right? And yeah, he obviously had a high VO2 max, but what you're saying is that his efficiency of the skill was an extreme contributor. Probably what, if you had to put a number to it, like 50% of it?
I would definitely go higher than that.
I would
go 75 to 80%.
Okay.
Because of even with the years of wrestling at the highest level, in the collegiate level, he was, I don't know how far he got, but I know he was a pretty high level college wrestler. And when he takes it into his world, he's more efficient in that world than, let's say, 90% of his opponents. I would say that, unless you're running into, somebody like Usman or something like that, where he's another high level wrestler. So it gets nullified, So then, okay, what ends up happening there? Well, then you go, well, we have to make sure, just like I said before, is we're closing the gaps on the limiters. So yes, you're going to meet at times, there's going to be an equal amount of skill set. So what's going to be the X factor? It's going to be your physical capabilities and the other tools that you have in the toolbox to get the job done. That's why mixed martial arts is so interesting for a lot of people, because there's so many ways to win and there's so many ways to lose. Yeah. So that's why you don't have, it's an anomaly when you have a Khabib who can be undefeated, because he was so dominant in that one thing where nobody could touch him, and he was competent in everything else. That's why, I think that with Makhachev, it's an interesting thing, because he's a high level grappler, but he has great striking. Who knows with this one with Topuria coming up to 55, this is going to be fun to watch, because Topuria is really good at striking. Yeah. And he's competent in wrestling, and he's strong, and he's got great conditioning. So we're getting to a point now with fighting in mixed martial arts, and everybody's coming up and they really don't have any weaknesses. It's just everybody's equally phenomenal, especially in the UFC. Before, you're like early 2000s, you knew that there was gaps in people's games, and then you would take it to where that's how I won my last fight. I fought a guy who was primarily a striker. And even though, I like to primarily strike, I knew I needed to take it in order for me to win the fight. So all 3 rounds, all takedowns, 1 takedown every round, and just control on the ground. And I won the fight easily. And you go, and I remember the interview that they did for me afterwards. They were like, well, man, you took it to your strengths. And I go, it ain't necessarily my strength. It was just his weakness. And so as a I would say as a strategist, the goal was to do things that I knew that he wasn't comfortable doing. And so now it's interesting, like I said, because you have to find what's the weakest link and then exploit that weak link. Because if not, then it's going to be, your skills against my skills, your talent against my talent. And then whoever's the biggest man or the best man wins that night. But it's an interesting time for sure, because guys now and kids now are starting MMA very young. This is not like back in the day where you started off with jiu-jitsu, you started off with wrestling, you started off with karate. These kids are doing MMA at 8 years old. Yeah. So it's interesting.
Have you seen those, obviously amateur fights, but it's like, I think it's like 12 years old.
Yeah.
Yeah. I forgot I don't know what states.
They're doing strikes to the body and submissions. Yeah. Strikes to the body, no headshots, but and submissions. And these kids are killers, man. Like, I'm like, damn, it's so great, because at that young of an age, they're just like, it's like mold them like clay. There's no bad habits, right? There's no dysfunction in movement quality. And going into PT school, when you start to get injured, you have to work around a lot of those injuries. And then you start to develop compensation patterns, right? And then all of a sudden, now you can't do certain moves that you were able to do when you didn't have that injury, because it causes a cascade of issues down the line, up the kinetic chain, that kind of hinders your movement quality. And I think when I was, one of the things that I was able to do, or at least find out across the board, I was like, you know what? There was a programming issue, which we fixed that with the condensed conjugate model. I wanted to run a conjugate-based system because I wanted them to be ready at all times. So I needed to have like a concurrent programming approach to make sure that my guys were ready if they got called up on short notice or whatever have you. And then I was starting to see that we were limited with our tool set, meaning we were limited with our exercise selection because they didn't have the joint prerequisites to do certain movements. And they were in these fixed positions for so long, right? Because you look MMA or striking sports or grappling, your body starts to mold into that particular aspect of the game. And they were losing mobility in certain ranges. So when they got into those ranges or got put in those positions, they weren't strong enough to get out of those positions. And one or two things happened. One, they would either get dominated, or two, they would just get injured trying to fight out of it. So my biggest thing was I said, okay, what is something that is going to help change for the better the athlete's ability to move and move efficiently? And it was mobility work, right? And what I mean by mobility, it's active and range control, especially in base positions that is not so foundational. You got your foundational patterns, your squat, push, pull, hinge, lunge, all of that, rotate, everything. And in jiu-jitsu, you're inverted, and not to say in MMA, but you don't want to be inverted, you get punched in the face. But you're in some deep, weird positions, and you have to have the optimal range of motion, not just passively, but actively. Right. So if I'm getting stacked and I just don't have the strength to maintain a position, well, I'm going to get passed, right? Just because I'm not strong there. Now I could get there. You can fold me up like a pretzel. But if I'm not strong enough, then my guard it just doesn't matter anymore. So I wanted them to get that. And that was one of those things where I put that into play just based off of what I saw, and I see that across the board now with working with my coaches and working through them with their athletes, and a lot of these guys are working with not just MMA, but you got Muay Thai, you got Judo, you got Jiu-Jitsu, you got boxing, and they all have their issues when it comes down to what's the limiting factor for boxers, what's the limiting factor for Jiu-Jitsu and all that. So, but across the board, mobility and strength are the two X factors that I would say that help the athlete achieve great things inside of their sport.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and you were talking about achieving strength in those deep, sometimes awkward ranges of motion that sometimes the sport doesn't put you in consistently, but consistent enough to where it's a risk of injury if you end up in that range of motion without strength, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I've heard you talk a lot about FRC training, and personally, I use it a lot with a lot of my clients and a lot of people I coach.
Mm-hmm.
And I want your opinion, if you have anything to add about FRC that you feel like is relevant, but I want your opinion on joint-specific FRC training, specifically FRC as it relates to the spine.
Mm-hmm.
Because with a lot of traditional strength training, it's core bracing, make the spine rigid, brace, keep everything stiff, right?
Yeah.
And in MMA and jiu-jitsu and such a sport with so many variables, that's not realistic, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if that is the case, you're not moving right. So how do you feel people should approach the spine as it relates to either strengthening, maybe FRC training, maybe just, treat the spine as a rigid muscle, right? Instead of...
Well, it depends, right? So if you look at Dr. Stuart McGill's work, he's all about bracing and intra-abdominal pressurization, which I do believe that has a place, but just not as direct and as for a long period of time, because you're not doing a 1 rep max underneath a barbell doing a sagittal plane squat. What you are doing, though, you do need to brace in the moment of impact when you're striking. Mm-hmm. But it has to be very efficient, very fast, and the ability to rapidly contract and relax is going to showcase if you're a better athlete or not, right? Not only to be able to contract fast, but relax fast. And you have to be able to do that sustainably for a long period of time. So I don't find it unnecessary to strengthen up the lumbar spine. I don't find it dangerous, in a sense, when it comes down to actual sport play. Because when we're training, though, we can control the environment. When you're fighting, you can't, right? To a degree. And so for me, let's say from a functional range conditioning standpoint, and Dr. Andrea Spina did a great job by putting it together from a systematic perspective and understanding joint articulation and making sure that you can gain capacity in each joint. I also take a great Cook approach where you look at a joint by joint perspective, right? So then certain joints need to be mobile and certain joints need to be stable. Now, to what degree? Well, it depends on the movement and it depends on the situation. So again, I can't blanket an approach because it is situational specific, it's circumstances and so on and so forth. But what I will say is that as far as a training perspective, we want to get them strong in those positions, especially getting closer to the sport of play. And that's where specificity comes in from an exercise selection standpoint inside the weight room. Doesn't mean that you need to throw punches with weights in your hands, but let's do a good morning. Let's do a Zercher squat, right? Let's do something that's going to strengthen up the spine and also allow for the muscles that support the spine to be contracted and understand how to contract as efficiently as possible for that effective intensity.
Yeah.
Right? Because there is never a time where you're going to do a true 1 rep max for a longer, for that period of time. At the end of the day, when you get closer to a sport like combat sports, a lot of it is rate of force and the ability to contract and relax. So isometric, quasi-isometric, and then also rapid fire speed strength, right? So I would aim, especially getting closer to a fight, I do contrast work where I'm going to be doing something more isometric, high force output, because if you look at it from a force velocity standpoint, the highest amount of force that you can produce, this is for you guys out there that don't really have an exercise science background, right? The most strength I can produce is the lowest velocity. And vice versa to that, the highest speed, I produce the lowest strength. And right in the middle is where you get power production, right? So if you look at it from physics, right, force times velocity equals power. So when I get closer to a fight, what are the main key concepts in a fight? Well, it's producing power and it's being able to do that sustainably. And this is just from a strength, speed, power perspective. We can talk about conditioning after. Now, with that being said, I also need to make sure that my joints are capable of doing the movements. So with mobility, it allows me to focus on the ranges that I have available and still work the qualities of strength, power, and speed in those particular ranges. On the flip side to that, I still want to work on increasing the capacity of each joint. So whether it be a shoulder or a T-spine or something along the lines of that, where those joints need to be mobile in order for you to produce power from, because that's how you punch, that's how you kick, that's so on and so forth. From a jiu-jitsu perspective, it's a lot of isometric tension and it's sustained. But then again, you also have to be mobile on the outer extremities. So if I'm pinning a person down and I have to pass guard, well, I can't just be stiff and rigid, but I still need to be able to control. So you need to find out what needs to be stiffened and what needs to be mobile in that same sequence of events. You can utilize certain exercises in the weight room to, I don't want to say mimic it, but to give it the best opportunity to transfer over.
Yeah.
Right?
And that's with like all exercises, really. And that people are really obsessed with efficiency and kind of this over-analysis of sports-specific training in the weight room.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like, oh, bench press doesn't translate to jiu-jitsu, but me squeezing a med ball with a rear naked choke grip translates to jiu-jitsu. And it's like, yeah, literally that does. But, if you can hang clean 225, you can ragdoll anybody probably. Right?
Sure.
And so, you mentioned the Zercher squat, and I'm a big fan of Zercher movements, squats, carries, box squats. To me, the Zercher squat, yes, it's great for the low back. It's great for thoracic spine stability. But comparing like a Zercher squat to something more extreme on the other end of the spectrum, or not on the other end, but deeper on that end of the spectrum, like a Jefferson curl. And classic movement, been around for decades, but how beneficial is like a Jefferson curl because a Jefferson curl is, somewhat of that, functional range conditioning. but it's a really extreme version of it, right? And so do you think that, the Jefferson curl has its place, it's just so far down the line, it's for reserved for only the advanced individuals that have really mastered the searcher, mastered the isometrics?
Yeah, I think
as
that
it relates to this one.
for sure, the foundational patterns first, master those. Then you can throw these special exercises in. This is basically what we call them. And I think that, it's those extreme ranges that you have to start to improve upon if that's where you're lacking. Like if you've had 5, 6, 7 years weight training experience, now you can start to implement these things because you've set the baseline, right? You set the general strength capacity to do these special strength movements. But most people jump ahead, just like everything, right? They want the quick fix, or they want to fast track their way into being the most elite athlete, and it takes time. And so what I would say is get really good at the basics. Just like, I know everybody harps on that, but it's true. You got to get really good at the basics. I think Jefferson curls are safe enough to do as long as volume is equated for and also the weight, right? Mm-hmm. So again, it's like minimal effective dose and then work your way up into the maximal recoverable volume, right? Dr. Mike Israel talks a lot about it. But it's true. Yeah.
There's a lot of great work.
Mike's a jiu-jitsu guy too. I just had a conversation with him.
Really?
On text, yeah. And he's right when it comes down to like programming and creating the optimal amount of volume, because you have to be able to recover from that volume. And then you don't want to put yourself in a bad position to get injured, especially from a combat sport perspective. Like you get injured in the weight room, that's the worst thing you could do in any sport. Like don't do that. It's the fastest way for strength coaches to get fired, But yeah, I see that. And also, you got searcher squats from the ground, remember that? And you pick it up, And there's things that if your body is capable of withstanding that load, but you got to know the capacities of the joint. And so it takes time. One, get the range that you have, that you can get to, like the optimal range, and then start to slowly progress the intensities. And then that's going to dictate the volume, right? So you start again very low and then work your way up, just like anything. Mm-hmm. But people make it too complicated than it needs to be. Now, it is complicated, but wait a couple years before you have to get too complicated. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. And I work in a big box. I work for Gold's Gym. Okay. And I train a lot of people out of Gold's Gym. Yeah.
All right, don't tell them.
Yeah, don't tell them. And I'll keep this. And so I see a lot of people daily that get their info from social media. And you find a lot of those people that fall in love with the News Over Toes guy. And he does a lot of great work. Mm-hmm. But people see these exercises and they don't necessarily read the explanation or hear them out. They see it and they think, oh, astrograph split squat. I'm doing that 5 sets of 5 every day. And it's like, damn, why do my knees hurt? Mm-hmm. And then they'll come talk to me and they're like, hey, why do my knees hurt? And I'm like, okay, well, what are you doing? Like, oh, I'm doing astrographs. Okay, how long have you been training? Oh, 3 months. What were you doing before that? I've never touched a weight. And it's like, okay, were you doing the astrographs under load? I'm like, yeah. It's like, okay. Yeah. So essentially what you're saying is, and this is as true as it gets for everyone in the field of exercise science, everyone in the field of, kinesiology, academic, practitioner, and whatever, they'll all probably tell you, for every question you ask them, it depends is always the answer. And then the baby step, right? Like you said, starting with the microdose, or not the microdose, the least effective dose, and then progressing from there, right? And so to kind of come back to the question I asked about the Jefferson curl, it's effective on a very, far end on the, far down the timeline of your training, right? But okay. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, like, just do something basic and get really good at the basics, just like you would, like, it's the same thing with jiu-jitsu nowadays, right? And people want to learn berimbolo rolls and they want to master X guard, and they just don't even know how to do a basic 4-point armbar. And so you go, why? Well, because I saw it on TV.
Yeah.
I saw it on YouTube, and like, damn, all right, well, no, don't do that. Really fine tune the fundamentals and your foundational strength, because that's going to carry over, and you can, again, start to work those things in when the time comes. But you'll get good at just doing the basics. You'll get good at doing the minimal that you need to do, and then slowly progress it down the line. You're setting the ceiling too low for yourself and potentially causing future risk of injury, right? And then coming to see you, right? And then having to spend that money.
Yeah.
All right.
I mean, okay. I don't mind it, but
I know.
Yeah.
I know. So keep doing it.
Please don't. How you dealing with it? But okay, as we wind down, I want to kind of do this fire off questions, right? So I got like 3 or 4 questions. You can answer them, a couple answers, as brief as you want to make them, as long as you want to make them.
Okay.
If you want to go on a tangent with it, by all means do.
Okay.
Right? If it really speaks to you.
Yep.
So first, I recently, went through a period of time where I was going through all these schools interviewing for physical therapy programs. And at Angelo State, I was talking to them about some people that really affected my life positively and that I use as positive role models and helped me get to where I am today. And something they told me that really resonated with me was, for one, I'm there telling them about these people and they say, okay, when's the last time you told them that? And it was recently. I do tell them every time I see them. But I was like, I don't think enough of us really take that to heart, of showing people in our life that help get us to where we are enough appreciation, right? And so I want to give you the floor for a moment to shout out, talk about anyone, maybe, Dean Thomas, maybe someone at your college, maybe someone at, when you were growing up, that helped get to where you are here, and how that happened for you.
Well, first and foremost, Jesus Christ. That has to be first of the list and will always be first of the list. When I was locked up and I was facing 60 years in prison, I said to myself, why are you here? What is going on? And I started praying, and I got a voice in my head, and I know what voice it was. And it was just God telling me that this isn't what was meant for you. And you need to tighten up, son. And so from then on, I've dedicated myself to being the most truest that I can be, and the best that I can be for not only myself, but also for my kids, my wife, my family, my parents, and that allowed me to truly take some inventory on why I'm here and understand my purpose. Because I think a lot of people get lost in that. I think they people want, and I'm not saying for everybody, but most of the time, just because of social media, I think people get caught up in the glitz and the glamour, or I want the new car, I want the new clothes, I want to live in a big house, I want to have all these things, and they don't really recognize the true meaning of life. And I think the true meaning of life is living through God's purpose. And the biggest thing that you can do is finding that out first and foremost, and doing everything you possibly can to acquire the skills necessary to achieve the things that God has put you here to do. So that has to be one. The second thing, or second person, I would say, would be my mother. And God rest her soul. She passed away 6 years ago. And, my mother was many things. Hard-nosed. She's actually the first person to teach me how to fight. Slap boxing with me when I was a kid. And, but she never doubted me. She always gave me the respect I needed and I would say, the confidence necessary to go after anything that I wanted to go after. So for that, it allowed me to hone in on my skills, and it allowed me to make sure that I did everything necessary, because I knew that I couldn't fail as long as I put the work in. She also instilled in me a great work ethic, along with my father. They both worked as hard as hell to give me what I needed. And to this day, I still think that my work ethic comes from them. Third, I'll take it to the coaches, which will be Joe DeFranco would be one of them, because when I was coming up, Joe was doing things with his athletes that I saw, that I knew that were going to help my athletes and myself elevate. And he was doing it very differently. Like he, warehouse facility, training guys with tires and sledgehammers, and it was just a different look. It wasn't like your standard bodybuilding routine. It wasn't like speed schools and stuff like that. It was hard-nosed, and they were using stones and they were pulling sleds. So I used a lot of his stuff in the beginning to really understand, like, all right, You don't need a lot to get a lot done. In my first gym, that's all I had. It was a tractor tire that I got from, a Tractor Supply. I got a rope from the dumpster. Literally, I washed it. Don't worry. I washed it down. I think I Purelled it. I don't know. Whatever. It worked. Sledgehammer and a jiu-jitsu mat. That's how I started my gym. I spent probably about $300. And then Louis Simmons. Louis Simmons helped me understand training and programming and intensities. And really understanding intensities from a mathematical equation as opposed to a feeling, right? Understanding, okay, what you need to do to improve your maximal strength, what you need to do to improve your dynamic capabilities, and then also working conditioning protocols that is going to allow you to be dominant in anything that you try to do. And then once you step in the gym, it's like a war zone, right? You attack the bar like it's your opponent, because it is at the end of the day. And so it allowed me to truly understand how to train, with that ferociousness that you need to, especially when you're going underneath the bar. And I powerlifted too with that same mindset, right? When I stopped fighting, that's when I stepped into powerlifting, and it was the same concept. You step on the platform just like you step into the cage. It's you against the bar this time. So that's another one. And then again, my last one would be my past experiences, myself, going through so many unfortunate things and learning from the process. I failed many times. As long as you learn from the failures, it's never a loss, right? So when I look at all these opportunities and all these circumstances, and the biggest thing where you can really measure true intelligence is going through certain things and being able to learn from them. No matter the situation, no matter the outcome or whatever have you, as long as you learn and you can, one, either learn in a positive way or learn never to do that shit again, well, you became more intelligent and you're going to be put in a better position for that. So yeah, that's it. That's probably the best ones that I could give you.
Yeah, that's a perfect transition. As we finish this up, I have something for you real quick.
Mm-hmm.
So I know you're a Catholic man. I know you're a man of your faith. I wanted to give this book to you, The Soul of the Apostolate. I don't know if you read it before.
Wow. No, I ain't it.
Yes. It's a really popular book. I know.
It's amazing.
I know you'll do it justice.
Oh, absolutely.
One of the main lessons in the book is to be, instead of being a channel of faith and a channel of Christ and just letting it pass through you onto somebody else, being a reservoir and living it, taking care of your inner self, and then sharing that with other people. And I'm a Catholic myself, and I know you pray the rosary, and so I knew this was perfect for you.
Absolutely.
But that's all the time we have. Yeah, we're a little bit over, but perfect. Again, Phil, thank you. I really appreciate you being reached,
man. Thank you. Awesome.
Yes, sir. That wraps up this episode of the Rolling Through Podcast. Huge thanks to Phil for coming on and sharing his knowledge. If you want to learn more from Phil, you can follow him on all social media platforms at DaruStrong. Please make sure to check out DaruStrong.com for his training guides, programs, and courses. Whether you're an athlete looking to improve or a coach wanting to level up your knowledge, there's something on there for you. And don't forget to grab a copy of his new book when it comes out later this year for more insights into his training philosophies and methods, Fight Ready, a combat sports performance manual. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with anyone who you think would benefit from it. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you guys next week.